This video was recorded at the Spring Institute, March 2021. Our guest speaker in this video is Islay MacTaggart, Assistant Professor in Disability and Global Health at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine.
It's really my pleasure to have been invited to participate and a wonderful group of, I am an Assistant Professor in Disability and Global Health at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And in terms of a visual description, I am a female in my mid-30s of mixed heritage. I have long dark hair and I am sitting in my kitchen in Glasgow. So I think it is really, really interesting to be part of a panel of presenters that come from such kind of critical theorist backgrounds, and it's quite different in a way to my own background. So I wanted to give a very brief sort of introduction to how I've ended up working in disability inclusive development and what that means, before looking at why the measurement of disability in disability inclusive development is so important and what I focus on. So firstly, by international development, I mean the process of supporting the empowerment of individuals, communities and countries out of poverty. I appreciate it's a very loaded term and we could probably speak for a whole session on what international development means and how that has been conceptualized in different ways over the decades, and some of which negatively. And particularly for myself, the interest has been around identifying and overcoming inequalities, causes of inequality and marginalization. This was, for me, partly, I spent my childhood overseas, most of which in Ethiopia, and I think that helped me become aware from quite an early age of these really profound inequalities and the impact that these can have on opportunities or lack thereof for different groups. Just super briefly, my own personal educational background, I have a bachelor's in economics, did a master's at the University of Manchester in international development with a focus on social policy and social development, and in 2008 returned to Ethiopia to work with a local NGO, the Ethiopian Centre for Disability and Development. ECDD is a fantastic organisation co-led by Yetnebersh Ngusi, who is an Ethiopian lawyer, herself blind since childhood and a strong advocate for people with disabilities in Ethiopia, and Bob Ransom, who was previously in the International Labour Organization Disability Unit. And under their guidance, I began working on research to support the rights of people with disabilities, including particularly some research that they were coordinating around the education of children with disabilities and violence perpetrated against them, which fed into several reports that I have just given screenshots for on the slide here, Breaking the Silence and the African Report on Children with Disabilities. Following that, I moved to the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine to join the International Centre for Evidence in Disability on a short-term contract in 2011, working initially on a child disability identification project. And 10 years later, I'm still here, still part of ICED. And what I wanted to focus on in this short presentation is the work of ICED within disability inclusive development, and how measurement of disability is underpinned by the ICF and the UNCRPD, both of which I'll talk you through. So ICD is within the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Our focus is on providing the evidence that improves health and well-being for people with disabilities globally. So whilst we are in a university that is health focused, our interest and expertise is broader and related to the different ways that well-being can be supported, including education, livelihoods, or stigma within international development. As I mentioned, this is really underpinned by the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which I imagine is known to everyone, but some may be less familiar than others. The CRPD has been ratified by over 200 countries, I think, worldwide now. It doesn't identify new rights not already covered in human rights conventions, but it explicitly underlines the rights of people with disability to all human rights enjoyed by all people. It describes persons with disabilities as those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments, which in interaction with various barriers may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. My group is a multidisciplinary team. We include epidemiologists, allied health and rehabilitation personnel, sociologists, and development practitioners. And we have three key areas of work. So measuring disability and impairments, health, well-being and disability, and access to health and rehabilitation. My focus within this, as I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, is on measuring disability and impairments. And this is important because, as you saw from the description of disability in the UNCRPD, disability as a concept is quite nuanced, and we need to have a common understanding of what we mean by disability and the population that this refers to be able to advocate for equality of opportunities in international development. I often refer back to this quote from the World Report on Disability, which was published by the World Health Organization in 2011, that disability is complex, dynamic, multidimensional, and contested. And I'm sure everybody has their own theories and models that they ascribe to, which can make it quite complicated in a area like international development to have comparable methods and outputs of different research projects that are seeking to support inclusion. So in terms of how we measure disability and identify disability for research projects in international development in ICD, we use the ICF. So the ICF is the International Classification of Functioning and Health, was endorsed by the World Health Organization in 2001 to complement the ICD-10, which has now been replaced by the ICD-11, and reflected the World Health Organization's increasing prioritization of morbidity and functioning, as opposed to an explicit focus on mortality that it had previously. The ICF classifies human functioning at three levels: body functions and structures at the level of the body, activity at the level of the person, and participation at the level of society. So it describes how human functioning exists along spectrums at those three different levels, with disability conceptualized as an umbrella term for dysfunctioning at any of the different interlinked levels. In this way, disability is also mediated importantly by contextual factors. So the interaction between a health impairment and an individual's activity or participation is mediated, for example, by the environment that they live in and personal factors. And in this way, disability is a process as opposed to an outcome. I have put a slide on the screen here which provides a visual depiction of the ICF, and I'll quickly talk us through. I appreciate that we've only got a little bit of time, but for those of you who are in the breakout rooms, we can talk about this in more detail because it's quite a meaty framework and has quite a few different interrelated aspects to it. So the ICF looks at how a health condition can lead to impairments in body functions or structures, which in turn can lead to activity limitations. Activity limitations can impact upon participation, but the relationship between the health condition and any outcome in terms of impairments, activity limitations, or participation restrictions, as I said, is mediated by contextual factors. So as an example, imagine the health condition glaucoma. Glaucoma can cause visual impairment, which in turn can lead to difficulties, for example, walking and walking around independently if you have a vision impairment, which can potentially limit the ability of an individual to be able to go to their job, to be able to walk to their place of work. Now, the impact that glaucoma does or does not have on an individual being able to see, walk, be able to go to work can be influenced by environmental factors. Do they have access to assistive devices, for example? or personal factors. Do they have access to training that supports them to be able to continue to do their job? So it's important that we understand with the ICF that disability is seen as the interaction across these different levels of functioning and the environment, as opposed to being a status or outcome for a specific individual. And so what this means is that we use the ICF to be able to generate data on disability prevalence, but also on the opportunities for people with disabilities compared to people without, which help us to identify interventions that are international development interventions that are disability inclusive. So without going into detail, there are particular tools such as the Washington Group tools, which are now the prevailing methodology. And I wanted to quickly flag that although this probably sounds in some ways quite conceptual, it is very tangible and very important in terms of us being able to provide outputs that are that support finding the most effective interventions. So an example was in 2019, we completed a very large survey of disability and access to WASH in Vanuatu in the Pacific. And from there, we're able to tease out some really important barriers that people with disabilities experience in relation to incontinence and menstrual hygiene needs, which have allowed us to support programming in Vanuatu to be more disability inclusive. We also look at how impairment as a component of disability, not a proxy for it, can be measured to support access to health. Now I might just skip over this slide because I think I'm slightly running over time, my apologies. Just to say that the work that I have been involved in, as well as looking at the measurement of disability, also focuses on measurement of impairment, as I said, as a component of disability, but not a proxy. And I've just put some examples on the slides there of some of the other work that I've been involved in, which I'll put in the Dropbox too. And then I just wanted to finish by saying that the measurement itself is not the endpoint. So some examples of how we use measurement of disability to inform disability inclusive development. A program for evidence to inform disability action. PENDA is a large project we're working on at the moment, many randomized controlled trials. We have the Disability Evidence Portal, which synthesizes available evidence on disability inclusion for policymakers. And we recently launched the Lancet Commission on Global Eye Health. So I'm very sorry for running over time ever so slightly. I have added a couple of web links here, which again will be in the Dropbox. So for those of you who want more information, please do get in touch or visit the website. I hope that was a bit of a rattle through.
Thanks very much for watching. You can like and subscribe to our channel below. We're currently working on a British Academy funded project looking at the lived experience of disabled people during the pandemic. And you can find out what we're up to at tendproject.com or on Twitter at tendproject. Thank you.